All right, this is Citizenship and Immigration Attorney Parviz Malakouti. Welcome to our 53rd Mobility Space. Today's topic is what I call the visa denial domino effect. I'm going to talk about exactly what I mean by that. But first of all, this is our 53rd Mobility Space. We do these weekly, Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Everybody is welcome to join. Everybody is welcome to speak. If you want to speak, just send me a request and I will approve it right away. Okay, so visa denial domino effect. Okay, so what I mean by this term is this concept, this dynamic that when you apply for not just a visa but any type of mobility benefit, let's call them ETAs as well, ETAs, visas, residencies. When you're denied one of those, and then you go and apply for a visa later on, either in that same country or in another country, the fact of the previous denial is a negative factor for you. Okay, that's something. This is a concept that's been around. It's not necessarily been called this, but this has been around for a long time. The more denials you collect, the worse your profile becomes for future mobility applications, including visas, ETAs, even some residency applications as well. And one denial is worse than no denials. Two denials is worse than one denial, etc. And this is why I call it the domino effect, right? Because once you pick up one, you're more likely to get the second, and then with two, you're more likely to be denied another one, right? Like I said before, this is not a new concept, but I think this is going to be a new concept for Americans and Westerners in the next, let's call it 1 to maybe 3, 4 years. And that's because of the simultaneous rise of ETAs, electronic travel authorizations, which I've called Visa Light. More and more countries where previously they gave visa-free access to nationals of another country are now implementing an ETA. Okay, we're used to, if you're American, if you're a Westerner, you're generally used to the idea that visa-free travel meant that you just get your passport, you book a flight, you enter the information of your passport into the flight booking, and then you just go. Okay, you're not used to applications before traveling. Okay, generally. ETAs, electronic travel authorizations, are basically applications that you have to fill out before, usually before even boarding the flight in order to go to another country, in order to basically be approved and then be able to access that country, quote unquote, visa free. Okay. Now, I've written before that I don't think Visa Light or excuse me, ETA is really visa free anymore. I think it's actually more akin to a visa application than visa free, because I consider the main elements of a visa application to be a form that you have to fill out that before traveling. That's deniable. Okay, to me, that's a visa. Okay, now that doesn't mean that I think that they're of equal weight. I still think you're in a way better position filling out an ETA application than filling out a visa application. So I'm not saying they're exactly the same. I'm just saying in likeness, in nature, I think an ETA is closer to visa application than it is to visa free. Okay, but how does this affect the visa denial domino effect? Well, for the first time now, Americans, if they want to travel to the UK, Australia has been around for a while. Australia's had ETAs, but Australia, the UK, JESTA for Japan in 2029, and then most importantly, ETAs, okay, the ETA system to travel to Europe supposedly at the end of this year. Now Americans have to fill out forms in order to travel visa free. Okay, that's a form. Okay, a form is a type of application. Okay, an application can be denied. Okay, that means that Americans and people that are filling out forms for ETAs are going to start dealing with denials. Okay, now I don't mean mass denials. I don't mean everybody. I don't even mean a majority. I just mean whereas it's not really been in the American travel zeitgeist, the idea that you're going to be denied access as an American to go to France or something. Now that's going to become a reality. That's going to become a thing. Okay, and the more applications, including ETAs, that Americans and other Westerners have to fill out now, obviously, the more likely it is that they're going to be denied in a future ETA or visa application. Okay, because an ETA denial is a form of denial. Now, I'm speaking generally about this principle and this concept. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of little differences at the margins between countries. Different countries have different questions on their ETAs, and obviously have different domestic immigration law regarding what the guidance is to ETA adjudicators, for who to deny and who not to deny. But in my opinion, the dynamic, the concept is undeniable. Okay, Americans are going to start having to fill out ETAs That's going to result in some denials. Those denials are going to be a negative factor for future applications that they make down the line. Okay, so this is something that I foresee coming down the pike for Americans. I don't think all Americans are going to be equally affected by this. I do think there's a few classes that are going to be affected more than others, and I'll go over those. But if you go typically over some sample ETA application forms to get an idea about what they ask about, typically there's a few greatest hits, so to speak, that you see in a majority of these ETAs. Okay, one of them is previous criminal record. Okay, asking in various forms. Okay, whether a person has a previous immigration. I'm sorry, not immigration, a previous criminal record. Now that could be a criminal record within the last 12 months. It could mean a conviction that led to over 12 months incarceration. It could mean any type of criminal record. It could mean a criminal record for the last 5 years. They phrase them differently, but the bottom line is they're asking about criminal records. Okay, so the first category of Americans that I think are going to be negatively affected by the rise of ETAs, especially ETAs, and this visa denial domino effect, is going to be Americans that have convictions, and then to a lesser extent, arrests and charges that did not result in convictions. Okay, so that's category number one. Category number two, I already kind of alluded to this. It's going to be people that have previous immigration records, let's call it. Okay, now that could mean a denial for an ETA or a visa. It could mean an order of removal from a country or an actual removal. But the bottom line is, another thing that you see in a lot of ETAs, when you look at them, is asking about whether a person has been denied a visa, either to that country specifically, okay, or generally, whether somebody's had a visa denial or not. And that's not just a question that's asked on ETAs. It's also asked when people show up for visa applications. Okay, so when people have applied for visas and they show up in interviews, that's another type of question that's commonly asked, let's say. Okay, so that's one category. Third category of Americans that I think is going to be affected are Americans who are what I call adventure travelers. Okay, so Americans who like to go to danger zones, war zones, places that are failed states, semi-failed states, okay, naughty states, okay, evil states like Cuba and Syria and Iran, okay. Those are countries that you see sometimes mentioned on ETAs and ETA policies, either as a negative factor for the applicant or sometimes entirely foreclosing the ability of the applicant to actually be able to get the ETA. And, in that latter example, what I'm thinking about is ESTA, of course, the ETA to be able to travel visa-free to the United States. You cannot travel to the United States on ESTA if you've been to Iran and Cuba and a few other countries since 2011. So that's a third category. And then a fourth category, which might be a little bit more controversial, definitely newer. Okay, and this is a product of my speculation. Okay, there's not necessarily much of a track record for this. Is speech. Okay, people that are controversial characters online. Okay, people that have opinions that are either generally controversial or, let's say, controversial to the political environment of the country that's the person is applying for an ETA in. Okay, so this could have to do with opinions about Palestine, Israel, Ukraine, Russia. Okay, whether you're celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk, or whether you're criticizing Donald Trump, or things like that. Just speech in general. Okay, that in any way, shape, or form could be other than milk toast. Okay, I think that that's and I think that's going to be a criteria that we're going to see people run into trouble on with regards to these ETA denials. And that one might be the most pernicious of all, because those denials might not actually result in a person knowing that they were denied based off of that fact. I think that's the type of criteria where a person could be denied and they're not going to actually be given an explanation, right? So these are the categories that I believe, the categories of Americans, and let's say just Westerners in general, or people that have ETA eligibility in general, okay, that are going to be most vulnerable to basically catching that first denial and then being caught up into a negative, mobility denial domino effect, like I said, right? Now, what does this mean? Should people just, sit on their hands and just, wait for this inevitability to come and not prepare? No, if you're into travel, if you're into freedom, if you kind of believe that this is coming down the pike, and you want to take steps to prepare or to at least start thinking through these issues to think of what are the second and third order effects, I think that's something that you should do and something that you can do. Okay. So couple tips, couple things that I'm thinking about for, my clients, people who have consults with me, just generally. Okay. We know that across the board, criminal records are an issue, okay? Meaning it's a negative factor, to say the least, for ETAs as well as for visa applications in general, right? Americans are not used to generally being denied, like I said, ETAs based off of a criminal record or for any reason at all. Okay. And so, a lot of Americans who have had a brush with the law, okay, don't actually know what's on their record. And if you've never had a brush with the law, that might come as a shock. You might think, well, how could somebody have a conviction and not know that they were convicted? They were arrested, they were charged, they showed up in court, okay, they pled guilty, or they went to trial. How could this be? And trust me, it's a real thing. It's a real dynamic. I have a lot of people that do consults with me that are Americans looking for second citizenship or residency. They have a criminal record, and there's a huge dissonance, mental, cognitive dissonance. People convince themselves of all different things. Okay, commonly people who've had an arrest and a charge, but they never actually spent any time in jail. A lot of these people are adamant that they have no criminal conviction. Okay. In reality, many of these people actually pled guilty to something, but they just didn't serve any jail time. And to them, in their mind, they arrested and charged, and somehow their attorney worked something out with the prosecutor. And that's still a conviction. Okay. So I don't want to hammer too much on the specifics of that point, but the point is people do not know. Many people do not know exactly what their criminal record is. They don't know if they were arrested but not charged, if they're arrested and charged, if they're arrested, charged, and convicted, or exactly what they were convicted of. The solution to that, if you've ever been fingerprinted by law enforcement, the solution to figuring this all out is to order your FBI background check. It's an FBI identity history summary. That's that accesses the national repository. It's the FBI CJIS, Criminal Justice Information Services. And that pulls criminal data, arrest, charge, and conviction data from 18,000 criminal justice agencies from throughout the United States. So if you're listening to this, if you're an American, if you're concerned about ETA denials down the line, okay, or if you've had a brush with the law and you're American and you have any interest in just being mobile in the future, 100% you should order your own FBI background check to at least see what's on it. Okay, so that's my first tip. Second tip, or let's say 1B related to that, if you do have some sort of arrest, charge, or conviction, you need to figure out, maximize whatever post-conviction relief is available for that. Okay, and by post-conviction relief, I mean getting an expungement or an expunction or a vacatur or record sealing, arrest sealing. These things have different names and different meanings in different states, obviously, but generally that's what I mean by post-conviction relief. Some sort of relief that improves your criminal record and notably softens the language on the FBI background check after you've actually been convicted or arrested or charged. Okay, so that's a first tip that I think about. Second thing, and by the way, I'll open this up for discussion in a couple minutes. We got some good people here. We got Alex, we got Patrick, we got David. I want to hear everybody's opinion on this, and if anybody has any experience with this, would love to hear it. That's the first thing that I think about. Second thing that I think about is start thinking potentially if you have any of these, especially if you have any of these sensitive elements. Okay, travel to a danger zone, previous immigration record, removal, denial, previous criminal record. If you have any of these, you might want to start thinking about ordering your ETA application strategically going forward. Okay, and what I mean by that is if you don't want to be caught up into the roller coaster of the denial effect, okay, then that means basically if you're applying for a country in an ETA that starts having the reputation or knowledge, or even maybe sometimes they put out their guidance saying that they're going to be difficult on ETA applications, or specifically difficult on ETA applications for people who have X criteria. And if you have that criteria, maybe you don't want to apply for that ETA first. Okay, maybe you want to hold off. Okay, and make sure that you don't collect a quick denial with that ETA that's then going to sink you if you apply for an ETA to another country later on. It's a little bit early to be talking about specifically which ETA should go first, which countries, because some of these countries have not rolled them out yet. And Europe, which is probably the most important for Americans, has not rolled out ETAs yet. So it's a little bit early to be saying exactly or to be thinking about exactly which ETAs to order first, second, third. But I would just get into the mindset of thinking about this as a potential strategy for you, right? You don't want to pick up that ETA denial. Okay. Um, that's a second tip. Third tip is to start thinking about the possibility of bypassing the ETA. Okay, right? And what we've seen, and again, I'm speaking generally here. Okay, ETAs are typically basically being presented to people who have visa-free access. Okay, to the country. Okay, people who are not a citizen of the country, people who do not have some sort of residency permit in the country. Okay, as well as people who are not citizen or have residency in the country, but are citizen of a country that's in a borderless zone with that country. Okay, so famously Shenzhen. Okay, so what that means is if you're accessing the country under one of those other, three categories, you don't have to request an ETA. Typically, again, I'm painting, with a broad brush here, but typically we're seeing that that's being the case. Okay, now getting citizenship in a country is not necessarily a fast thing. It's usually not a fast thing, but getting residency in a particular country, that's on the board. Okay, that as an option, especially temporary residency, especially if it's going to be in a borderless zone like Shenzhen, which is highly valued, generally speaking, highly valued among Americans and among people generally around the world. So the third tip would be start thinking about the ways to sidestep the ETA. Okay, number one, citizenship. Number two, a residency in the country. Number three, citizenship or residency in a country that shares a borderless country with the country that matters to you, that you want to access, without an ETA. Okay, so I do think we're going to start seeing residency, especially in Europe, but in other countries as well, strategic temporary residency pop up as a strategy for people to be able to avoid ETAs, or maybe even for somebody who's denied an ETA to try to make a play to be able to access that country, right? So, time will tell, but I think in a few years we're going to start seeing that be bandied about more and more as a benefit of residency in some countries, right? Now, circling back for a quick moment, okay, what happens when you're denied an ETA? Okay, now different countries have different protocols, right? Most countries, from what I've seen at least, if you're denying an ETA, you do have the recourse of being able to just apply for a visa, okay, a regular visa, right? That's the case with ESTA in the United States, right? Some other countries. Um, as far as I've read so far for ETIAS, and ETIAS is what's most of most interest to Americans, I think, right? Because it's Europe. As far as what I've read, it seems like ETIAS, in addition to being able to have the recourse of applying for a Schengen visa if you're denied ETIAS, it seems like they're going to have a little mini appeal process as well for people who are denied ETIAS. For a person to be able to either push back or to clarify or to correct a mistake if they perceive there's a mistake about their ETIAS denial. So it seems like the dynamic that's shaping up is that if you apply for an ETA, you're denied. Okay, you're probably going to have to apply for a full deal visa with the interview. And some countries and some zones might, as an intermediate step, allow you to appeal the ETA denial, before having to resort to applying for a regular application, right? So anyway, that's my little introduction. I'm eager to open this up to discussion. I want to hear from Alex. I want to hear from Patrick. I want to hear from David, as well as we got Janelle here, Janelle Windsor. Welcome. I'm going to send you an invitation to speak. You don't have to speak, but you're welcome to if you like. Okay. Let me kick out a first question for Alex, Patrick, or David, whoever wants to take it. Okay, just jump in, and if more than one of you want to take it, then I'd love to hear from all of you. Okay. First question is this. Okay. Do you think the rise in ETAs for Americans is going to fundamentally change American visa fee travel? Okay. Or do you not even agree with that as a fundamental premise? Patrick, David, Alex, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's the end of an era. Some people have called it the golden era of travel, where you could, with a rich country passport, travel to much of the world without ever needing to fill out any paperwork. And if you define visa as having to fill out paperwork to enter a country, I think it really started during COVID, where many countries started requiring health forms and other type of forms to enter the country. And it's only grown since then with the proposal of a bunch of ETAs everywhere. And I think many Americans are going to have a shock when they go to the airport at some point to fly to Europe or UK. UK's the first European country to implement it, and they can't board their flight because they haven't filled out an ETA. So I think it's going to be a big change.
Yeah, it's a good point. I didn't even cover that, right? How many people are going to show up to the airport without, without even having filled out the ETA yet, let alone filled it out and be denied. Yeah, I agree. I do think that's probably going to happen. Alex, do you venture to give any predictions of what percentage of Americans are going to start being denied ETAs or be denied ETAs either to the UK or to Europe? And my second question to you, Alex, is what percentage of denials is necessary for this to really, really hardcore enter the American travel zeitgeist that this is a thing? I don't think it has to be majority denials. I think it's going to be, I think it's only going to take maybe 5% denials to really, for Americans to really learn forcefully that this is a thing. But what do you think about those two questions?
Yeah, I think it'll depend on the political climate. As we've seen in the US, often people would say you could be profiling based on race or some other characteristic if you discriminate based on criminal background check, because criminal backgrounds are not equally distributed among races. So I could see that rhetoric in a certain time period or cultural era could have a big impact. But it seems right now we're transitioning a little bit away from the more quote unquote woke era to something else, and so I think that will have a negative impact on freedom of movement. Whereas in the woke era, I wouldn't be surprised if a bunch of a certain type of group were being denied. They complained that it was discriminatory, and then they became more flexible in criminal background checks. So I think the political climate is going to matter a lot. And 5% seems like a huge amount. So I would agree there'd be pushback. It might even be a smaller percentage if the right people, say a bunch of American rappers with criminal backgrounds, start getting denied to Europe and they start speaking out against it. That could be a much smaller population amount, but with a very loud voice. So I think it's more who rather than the percentage. But if the percentage gets high enough, then it'll become an issue for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. It's who's denied, how strong is their voice. I'm not sure we'll hear so much from the rich people though, because remember, those types that are denied the ETA, they can still just drop to, they can just fall back on applying for the Shenzhen visa, and that's oftentimes done through, I mean, almost always done through lawyers and fixers and managers and stuff like that. I wonder how many, American rappers and other high profile entertainers even know what was applied for and what was actually approved. I think we'll hear from them if they're denied entry entirely to Europe. If both the ETA fails, application is denied, and the Shenzhen application is denied. And so let's say the ETA is denied, the appeal to the ETA is denied, and then the Shenzhen application is denied. Okay, I think then we'll definitely hear from them. But I wonder how many people are going to fall into that middle ground where the ETA is denied, but then they fall back on the Shenzhen application, and then they get approved. Um, Patrick, what do you think about this rise in ETAs? Do you think this is something that's going to fundamentally change American freedom of movement, or is it already fundamentally changing American freedom of movement?
I think it already is. I think you already see a good 5 to 10% of people who are regular travelers to Europe already saying, "Oh, hey, oh, maybe I should really get citizenship by descent because my you know ancestor was from a European country because I plan on going here with some frequency in the future." And they might not get into the details about the chat around ETIAS, but they understand that their access to Europe is something that they want to prioritize. I actually, I'm going to agree with Alex when he was talking about the politics. I think that is kind of a factor. Harv, as you mentioned, 4 buckets. I think like a phantom 5th bucket is politics. And I'm going to take a couple minutes and explain why. And I know it's kind of already understood, but as a way to think about it, I see politics as a factor that makes the previous 4 you specified dynamic. Because politics, perfect example, I like to bring this up all the time, is Brazil. Because Brazil, like, notoriously does a horrible job marketing tourism, even though everyone talks about the crime, the issues around the 2018 Olympics, but they have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and they frankly could use, some hard currency in their tourism coffers. But then, as a means of reciprocity, they put a visa on Americans, which is not something you like from a strategy perspective. It doesn't make a ton of sense. I'll tell you, 99% of Americans who are going to Brazil are going to be less dangerous than Brazil. But the politics make that a dynamic, like, reflection of the domestic politics informs foreign policy. And I think that Brazil is a good example of that. And I think that's going to be the case in the future. Taking that same political lens and applying it to the UK, there's the stereotype of the British person telling America that, it's okay that they eat beans on toast because at least they don't have school shootings, right? It's like that kind of, it's a meme at this point. Like, think about a policymaker in the UK with speech laws. If they think that their speech laws apply to their people, of course they're going to think that they apply to, some uncultured tourists coming from the United States, right? So I think understanding a little bit of the local political economy is going to help you help inform your decisions, because that what is a higher potential in the future as it relates to visiting there from a visa perspective, including ETAs. So I think this will enter. I'm going to disagree with you slightly, Parvez. It's a very tiny disagreement. I think it's not going to be a 5% denial rate. I think as high as a 2% denial rate will get Americans discussing things more, because from an American perspective, it's something crazy, like over 50% of flights to Europe connect in London Heathrow, because of the 3 major air carriers, the one with the most transatlantic access is American, and it all goes through London Heathrow with their partnership with British Airways. So everyone who transits Heathrow is going to have that British ETA. And as soon as they start applying speech laws or denial because you said dumb things online, I shouldn't say dumb things, but political things online, all you have to have is hear about a friend of a friend who this happened to, and it changes your behavior. And a good example of this is all of the talk about people visiting from foreign countries to the United States, right? All of the dynamics you hear from Border Patrol at ports of entry into the United States. For U.S. citizens, it was probably less than 1%, but we heard enough about it for it to change behaviors. And so I think that's going to be true as it relates to Europe. Sorry, Alex, I think I cut you off.
I just wanted to add that you can transit through Heathrow without an ETA.
Then that's my mistake. I had originally thought that you also needed an ETA even if you were just transiting.
Well, to be fair, it's not very clear. And I know people who got an ETA just because they weren't sure if it would affect them, and better to be safe than sorry. But it's like the whole point of this conversation is it's a risk, because if you get denied for that ETA for whatever reason, that could negatively affect your life in your travel, and you didn't actually need the ETA. So just the mere existence of it will lead people to get denied. Even if they don't need it, they might think they need it. So that might be an interesting thing to consider as well.
So yeah, that's a great point. You're absolutely right. Some people are going to apply for the ETA to be belt and suspenders just to be sure. And if you take if you consider large numbers, some percentage of those people are going to be denied, okay, an ETA that they applied for that they didn't necessarily need, and then they're going to have that denial on the record, which is going to have a negative effect. It's going to be a negative factor on future visa and ETA applications. That's a fantastic point. I mean, that's why the existence of the thing is a threat. Even if it doesn't matter if it's 8 questions, 2 questions, 1 question, when it's a form that you have to fill out before traveling, that's deniable, okay, and usually filled out under penalty of perjury too, and that's a whole other topic, right? That another tax vector that I'd like to talk about at some point. It's a threat. Okay, forms are an attack vector. I mean, I know that might sound silly if you're just listening to this. Like, no, literally, a form given to you by a government, any government, is an attack vector. It's something that's demanding information from you that you have to give. That can be the basis of a denial. It's typically given under penalty of perjury, and it's also provides a record. Okay, you live your life on a timeline. You're going to live another 4, 5, 6 decades. Now you're getting information, giving information about yourself that your future information that you give has to line up with. And it doesn't take somebody trying to lie about themselves to give inconsistent information. I see this all the time in my practice. I'm sure any immigration lawyer would tell you this, okay? People's recollections, when you're filling out forms, especially when they're very specific questions or legalese questions, people's recollections of how they responded to that in the past differ, okay? Because oftentimes people are not answering a question that they're exactly sure of, what it's asking them, right? So yeah, the end of the era. I mean, going back to what you said, Alex. Yeah, I think it's an end of an era. I mean, I've tweeted before, I've written before. I think in 5, 10 short years, Americans are going to be telling, the people that are kids now and teens, we're going to be saying, yeah, you wouldn't even believe it. You would just take your passport, pick up, and go to the airport. No forms, no nothing. It was amazing. We didn't know what we had then. I truly believe that's in 5, 10 years what we're going to be telling, youngins coming up now that are dealing with ETAs and getting denied.
I just want to add that in case the UK as an entry hub to Europe. As far as connecting flights and so forth, if that comes to pass, and more and more Americans start getting denied ETAs, and maybe the situation is clarified, and we realize that, hey, we're supposed to have ETAs when we fly through London Heathrow. If that happens, I think demand for other entry points into Europe will rise naturally, whether that's Spain or Portugal or France. So the market has a way of working these things out, but yeah, I think there may be a search for more favorable entry points.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if you fast forward 2 years from now, if you need ETAs to visit France, and if it turns out that you do end up needing an ETA to transit through Heathrow, okay, then you need 2 ETAs, okay, in order to get to your destination, at least through that travel path, right? Requiring 1 ETA is better than requiring 2 ETAs, especially if you're in one of those 4, or let's call it 5 categories of people that we think are more vulnerable. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important point. Patience as Alpha had a tweet this morning, and he's said this before. We've actually spoken about this before in a previous space about how there might be increased awareness of bordering countries, which countries border one another, right? Because you don't, when you're traveling to a country that borders your country or one of your countries of citizenship, right? You're less likely to need to transit through another country, right? And in a world of proliferation of ETAs, that means then you're less likely to need another ETA or to apply for another ETA, or if you have an approval for an ETA for, let's say, 2 years, to be able to assert that ETA, right? And I do think that's a benefit, that could be, it could end up being a factor, I think, in people thinking about where to pursue citizenship, especially, maybe not their first or second citizenship, but if people are on their 3rd or 4th, what countries border, okay, certain countries that might end up being more of a factor.
I'm going to jump here and do a little Jeopardy potpourri. We had mentioned about maybe high-profile people who have been denied for countries. Granted, these are more legal cases, but it reminded me that I knew that in the past, the hip-hop artist Snoop Dogg, one of Southern California's great exports from the LBC, had been denied previously to go to the United Kingdom about 15 years ago or so. So I looked it up, and he had actually in the past been banned from 4 countries, and ultimately appealed and got over those bans. But I'm actually a little surprised that it's not better known. I knew about his ban from the United Kingdom, but at certain points in the past 15, 20 years, he's also been denied entry to the Netherlands, Australia, and Norway, mostly related to controlled substances and one violent disorder, and then another one was just a general character test, which, in words sounds funny, but as someone who looks at this through the lens of ETAs, that is a terrifyingly ambiguous statement, because you apply that logic to the average person, and the average person has an average character, which means half of them are worse. So that's something also.
Well, one thing to think about in regards to which country you enter is there's actually countries that are inside Schengen that are not in Schengen. 2 that come to mind are Monaco and Andorra. And so I wonder what would happen if you are concerned about your ETA accessibility. What happens if you enter Monaco or Andorra and there's not really a border control there? How does that work? And will people start doing that instead?
You mean enter? You mean enter, like fly into Andorra, and then cross a land border, an uncontrolled land border, to a country that you would need ETIAS for without getting ETIAS? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I don't know what the ETIAS requirement is strictly. Is it just for air travel? Is it for any entry? I'm not sure. But certainly with uncontrolled land borders in Andorra and Monaco, someone could conceivably, Monaco, you probably go by boat, or I guess helicopter is possible as well. And Andorra, I believe, is building an airport, but mainly it would be helicopter at the moment.
Yeah. So yes, ETIAS is going to be required for air travel as well as land entry. Okay, that's an interesting point. Yeah, so landing yourself in the middle of Shenzhen countries without applying for ETIAS. Yeah, maybe that's something to look out for. I do think there's also other consequences, other effects. I think the rise in ETA is going to affect the practical value of other mobility benefits. And so I'll just go over a couple of these, how I see it. And then, of course, I'd love to hear from other people as well. But I think the first one, most obvious one, is that the rise in ETAs makes the citizenship value for visa-free access go down, right? Because what an ETA effectively does is it takes the visa-free benefit, it moves it closer, more in the direction of a visa, and therefore, less. It reduces the value of citizenship, specifically for visa-free access to third countries. That's the first consequence I think of. Go ahead.
Jarvis, can you clarify by
Yeah,
visa-free access? What does that mean now? Because now we have
I
like
mean ETAs.
okay, because there's a
Yes,
Canadian that can enter US without ESTA,
right.
which would normally be classified in the same category as a British person who can enter US without a traditional visa but still needs ESTA.
Right. That's correct. Exactly. I'm talking about visa-free access, being
V
ESTA. Okay, moving towards ESTA.
visa. So when you say
I'm
visa
sorry.
free,
I'm,
you
so,
mean
I'm
visa
sorry.
light.
I'm sorry. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So let's call it visa light. Okay. Right. I just said visa free because there's not many other people using the term visa light. So, I wanted to make sure that everybody understands what I'm talking about. I mean, the value of citizenship, okay, for ETA access goes down. Okay, because that's closer to a visa than it is to what we've known as true visa free access. The second effect is I think I think the value of citizenship for highest right of access to a country goes up. Okay, because as we mentioned before, when you have citizenship in a country, typically you're not tasked with applying for an ETA there. Okay, so the harder it is for other people to visit your country of citizenship visa free. Okay, comparatively, the more your value of being able to enter without being denied an ETA goes up, in my opinion. Okay. Number three, I think citizenship value in an uncontrolled border zone like Schengen goes up, right? And that's for the simple reason that if you have citizenship in a country that's in Schengen, well, you're not effectively going to be denied to that country access to that country. And if you're denied, and if you're in that country, then you're in the Schengen zone, which means you can typically, visit other countries in the Schengen zone through uncontrolled borders. And the reason I say typically, just to clarify, I'm not sure if people know this or how many people know this out there, but countries within Schengen do actually erect internal border controls sometimes temporarily. They do this, and in fact, they've been doing it more, increasingly, and that's for public safety concerns, for different types of concerns, migration control. It's supposed to be for a short period of time, a temporary measure when it's absolutely necessary, right? But it does happen in practice. Okay, so that's why I say generally, pass through uncontrolled borders to other countries that are within Schengen. Number four, I think similarly, residency value in uncontrolled border zones also goes up. Same principle. Okay, if you have residency permit in a country that's that shares an uncontrolled border zone with other countries, okay, then you're likely going to be either unaffected or less affected trying to access those other countries by needing to fill out an ETA. Okay. Number five, the stakes for a bad ETA profile go up, right? And that's again, I think it's obvious. Maybe it's not so obvious, but I think it's because if you have a criminal record, adventure travel, previous removal order, okay. Whereas before that could trip you up in one or two countries that you wanted to visit that requires an ETA. I think in 5 years, the majority of the countries that you want to visit are going to require an ETA. Okay, again, not to bang on, not to beat on a dead horse, but Americans love traveling to Europe. I mean, that is, where Americans like going the most generally. Number six, stakes for controversial online speech go up. Okay, for the reasons that Alex talked about, Patrick spoke about, I spoke about. An ETA gives the country the ability to easily deny you, okay, for reasons, of your speech, your political affiliation, things that you might say or write that are unpalatable, okay. Whereas before, now you still could be denied, okay. This is not new that the country can deny you for speech. You could have been denied for speech previously, and in fact, some people have been denied for speech previously. But in those instances, the reach and the engagement and the outrage of the speech had to be generally pretty high to come on the radar of the immigration authorities, right? Now, okay, those thresholds are lower now, in my opinion, okay, because when you implement an ETA, all you got to do, like the United States is doing, is ask applicants, okay, give us your social media accounts, okay, for the last 5 years. It makes it much easier for speech that's let's say unpalatable, but didn't create a really, really big uproar to come on the radar of those immigration authorities. So I think the stakes for controversial speech goes up as a result. And then lastly, the stakes for a previous visa denial in a third country go up. Okay, the more you have to apply for things, like just straight up, the more applications you make, whether you call it a visa, an ETA, a residency, a semi-citizenship, a citizenship, the more applications you make, okay, the more likely you are to pick up a denial. If you don't ever apply for anything, okay, then you cannot pick up an application denial, right? It's literally that simple, okay? And that, like I said, many times now, is going to result in a mobility denial domino effect. Small trickle at first, very small trickle at first, but it's going to spread, okay? It's going to happen more often And then, like Alex said, it's going to happen to more people that have a voice, okay, that are going to start complaining about it online. Rappers are one thing. The category as far as being loud about this that I really am thinking about are online influencers, okay? Especially because the more you're talking online, and I talk a lot online myself too, so I'm also subject to this, but I don't have a huge audience. But the more you talk online, okay, the more you're likely to say something that offends somebody. I mean, if you go to somebody's Twitter profile and it shows 27,200 posts, okay, well, statistically, this is more likely that one of those posts was something that offended the sensibilities, the domestic political sensibilities of a foreign country, as opposed to, if a person has 200 posts. All other things being considered equal, the more posts you make, okay, the more little attack vectors that you put there to be denied for speech. So that's what I see as the consequences of the rise in ETAs. Um, Makes the value of citizenship go up, makes the value of residency go up. Okay, nested within every single citizenship application is what I call a super tourist visa. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean, if you have citizenship in a country, even if you don't live there at all, okay, even if you're not resident there, even if you've never been resident there, okay, immediate highest right of entry. That's a super tourist visa that's nested within citizenship. Okay. And the value of that goes up in comparison. The more difficult it becomes for people to visit your country or your countries of citizenship visa free or visa light, right? As Alex said, right? So citizenship value go up, not for visa free access, but for highest immediate right of access. Residency value goes up, in my opinion. Okay. Yeah, so those are my general thoughts about the consequences, what I think we have coming down the pike. um Patrick, question for Patrick, throw it back to you. Okay, somebody books a consultation with you, Patrick McFawn of Vexlum Consulting, helping people with citizenship by descent, and they say, you know what, I'm American. I might qualify for a European citizenship by descent. I might not, but I love travel. I want to be. I read The Sovereign Individual. I love The Sovereign Individual. I want to be able to go wherever I want, whenever I want, do whatever I want. And I see these threats on the horizon. Okay, what should I do? What should I do according to Patrick McFawn? One or two tips, okay, to prepare for this, coming down the line.
Ooh, boy, you teed that up well for me. First and foremost, obviously I'm a citizenship by descent consultant. I would say start on that process immediately, but that process is never fast. And so while I think that is very important to start yesterday, I would say start the gears on that first. Second, I would look into residency options and consider them. I wouldn't march off right away because I still think the threshold for ETIAS is pretty low right now for most people. But we spoke about how residency is going to get more valuable as a result. I would need to research it a little bit, but I suspect that in a post-COVID world, there was a dramatic increase in digital nomad visas, and so I think that depending on the access that those provide, those might be a tool for many people. And similarly, if ETIAS in the future gets a pretty high denial rate, let's say 2 to 5% or something like that, there potentially could be another type of super tourist visa that countries have to offer, right? There's going to be there's going to be some market threshold where they're like, yes, we're enforcing our laws against X, Y, and Z through this rate of denial. However, we are collecting a healthy amount of fees as a result, and so if there's a way that you can say, oh, hey, yes, I might have something that's denial worthy on an ETIAS, but I also have a digital nomad visa, well, it also proves that you have enough income that you're not going to resort to the things that got you the ETIAS denial originally. So I think that there's a conversation there that you can have that, while it might not be as valuable today, it could easily be very valuable in 2 years. And then lastly, and I'm going to sound like a broken record on this, is just get a thorough understanding of your profile from the perspective of an immigration officer. Look at your FBI background check. you look at any of the speech you have online, unless you earn a living or retain some value for speech. Sometimes maybe it might sound like a little bit like self-censorship, but if there's not a whole lot of value for you saying something particularly, clearly outside of the Overton window, maybe it's worth it more for your freedom of movement to not put that out there. Not saying what should or could. A right is a right. A right to free speech in the United States is a right, but it isn't that case everywhere, and so it's a factor to consider. And then I'd also look at the politics of wherever the destinations you are in the future. We talked about adventure travel. I'm gonna sound really, really crazy here, but I had a friend who is an adventure traveler who, when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, said, "Crap, that was my last chance in a while to visit Afghanistan." So, consider the local political economy of the destinations that you want to travel in the next 1 to 5 years, and that will also help guide your roadmap.
All right, good tips. Alex and David, are you guys doing anything just yet to think about this or think to prepare, or do you have any opinion on what people should do to prepare, or is it still a little bit early for you guys?
I would love to make myself immune to this problem by just having all the citizenships I need. I don't know if that's really realistic. But I do have a question about ETAs in general. I'm not very well versed in them. There's something that's kind of new to me, and I know we've discussed them here on the conversations, the spaces here from time to time. But I'm curious for nations that are part of kind of cooperative groups like the Schengen zone, like Mercosur, that do allow for freedom of movement for citizens of the member countries. Do you all suspect that even among internally to each of those kinds of groupings, that something like ETAs or visa-light practices will come into being, or do you think that those are generally going to be safe, I guess, for freedom of movement for citizens of the members?
That's a really good question, David. This is just my opinion. I think the EU and the EU Commission is trying to drive to make the European Union more like a country of states. Okay, kind of like trying to drive towards how the United States was in the beginning, like different colonies. You were a Pennsylvanian first before you were an American. So I think that institutionalizing barriers or controlled borders between them would harm that initiative. But on the flip side, we never know what a country is going to do, or if a country is going to. I mean, how many people could have predicted Brexit? Okay, just a few years before the UK left. And so you never know whether your access to other countries in the zone is going to be degraded or be lost entirely, okay, being a citizen of X country. And that's part of the reason that I hammer so much on understanding what's a springboard benefit, what's what I call a core benefit. Okay, I even used the terms core residency benefit and what I call satellite residency benefit. And specifically, I came up with that term thinking about the EU. Okay, your right of residency. You're a Croatian citizen. Okay, core residency right in Croatia. Satellite residency rights in Portugal, Spain, France, others. I think it's extremely important, okay, to distinguish the basis of those abilities to access a particular country, just so you know and so you're aware, okay, of the attack vector and the potential attack vectors that come down the line. So my short answer to you is no, I don't think that's going to be institutionalized, David, but at scale. But in any one particular situation, oh yes, it's absolutely possible. I think it's possible Hungary could leave, Poland could leave. Countries could have a tiff that somehow results in some sort of temporary border being put up or things like that.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
As for your question of how to prepare, I think the citizenship by descent for those who have it is worth exploring. and to talk to someone like Patrick, because you may not realize that you have it. There's a lot of weird edge cases and niche cases, and sometimes you can go back hundreds of years to qualify for citizenship. So, given that, I think it's worth talking to a citizenship consultant to see if you may qualify. Usually, it's not very expensive to talk with them. In addition, it may make sense to get residency. I know someone who is fairly successful, but they have a criminal background, and for them, the ability to go to Europe is very valuable. So they're considering doing the Latvia Golden Visa, which is about a $50,000 business investment plus a bunch of fees and stuff like that. It's probably closer to $100,000 that you're spending. Some of it you'll get back if you sell the investment in theory. But basically, his calculus was, well, me being retired business person, the biggest quality of life dip will be not being able to access Europe in my travel years. So I'm willing to get this investment if it helps to protect this right, even though I don't really want it, and in theory I don't need it, but it's not worth the risk of potentially being denied. So we'll see how it works. It's quite possible the same people denied for the ETAs are also denied for residencies, and even some citizenship by descent. You can get denied if you have criminal background or national security threat or other overlapping criteria, often with the ETA. So it should make people start to assess their options as well as how valuable it is to be able to access these zones. And lastly, I would say don't just think about you, think about future generations if you plan to have future generations, because the cost of getting citizenship for multiple generations is a lot lower than just for yourself. So if you're a young person and you're wondering, well, where should I go to university? If you go to university, maybe it makes sense to go to some EU country that has affordable universities, path to citizenship, lock in EU passport for both you and future generations, and that can be an interesting way to invest in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you the majority, maybe even the vast majority of my American clients who get European citizenship by descent do not have imminent plans to move to Europe. They want the option. They want the ability either to move full time or actually even more likely to do some sort of split arrangement situation, right? Home in the United States, wherever it is that they live, Pittsburgh, Miami, LA, wherever, and then the possibility of a home in Europe. Okay, so that's that idea, citizenship for the ability to, European citizenship by descent for the ability to reside in Europe, that is entering the zeitgeist. I would say that's probably entered the American travel zeitgeist. The next frontier is that idea of the citizenship in order to get the super tourist visa, right? And I think it's absolutely right. I would add one thing. I mean, I think a lot of people when they think about mobility, citizenship, their own freedom of movement, we naturally start by thinking statically, okay, just about yourself in this one moment of time. I don't think people think about their lives on a timeline. Okay, they either think statically now, or let's say, at some point in the future, I might want to do this. So either 1 point or 2 points. They don't think, I think, on a timeline, and they don't consider that over a timeline, things are going to change. Things in their personal life are going to change. Things are going to change in immigration policies of countries. Those political environments are going to change. Okay, you're going to have children, like Alex said, right? Not everybody, but let's say a lot of people are going to have children. Those children are going to benefit. Okay, you might qualify for citizenship in a country that has politics or leader or administration that you abhor. Okay, administrations come and go. Okay, the benefit of the citizenship is going to stay for you and your family, your descendants, even if it's a dictator type. Let's say even it's a president for 20 years or 25. Same guy, quote unquote, president of 20 years, i.e., a dictator. Eventually, he's going to die. He's going to lose power. Something's going to happen. And if the benefits of that citizenship are going to remain, okay, and it's especially worth it for you if it's a low cost citizenship. And what I mean by low cost is not the money that you spend to get the citizenship, but I mean judging by the cost of the extraterritorial obligations that that citizenship imposes on its citizens. And we've spoken about this ad nauseum in so many different spaces before, okay? The true cost of maintaining a citizenship and multiple citizenship is not what it took to get it. It's what you have to pay in compliance, okay, and in potential lack of freedoms for those countries that have obligations that they impose by law on their citizens, especially if they have, you know, an attitude of robust enforcement of those laws. So yeah, so that's what I would basically, that's what I would say. I agree with everything that Alex said, everything that Patrick said. Citizenship is also a super tourist visa, and I think that's going to become more apparent as ETA proliferation continues to grow. It's 12:03 Pacific Standard Time right now. We've been going for about an hour. We're doing these spaces with a hard cap of 1 hour. I have a deep bag of topics in my imagination. I'm going to pick 3 or 4. I'm going to put them up on a poll, and we will let the interwebs decide. Okay. I want to thank Patrick. I want to thank Alex. I want to thank David, Janelle, Chris, as well as all of our anonymous listeners. Have a great week.